At the end of 2015, Tyler and I bought a piece of property at the edge of town, right up against the forest. We built our nest in a place where other creatures already lived. One day, Tyler was sitting outside eating lunch, and Squirrel arrived, not far away, and sat down to eat a pine cone with him. My first pictures of Squirrel are taken from when we lived in the bump out, while the rest of the house was getting sheetrocked inside. Squirrel trying to eat the block of cheese inside Al's backpack. Squirrel gnawing through one of the plastic kitchen scrap buckets. I bought a replacement, and Squirrel gnawed a hole in that one too. So I bought some metal pots and put rocks on the lids so Squirrel couldn't get in. But then I would dump the kitchen scraps into the composting bins beside the house, and Squirrel would get into the bins and nibble on the scraps that way.
There's little buddy. He's right there. Eating something. Oh, you know what it is? It's something from my compost bin. It's like a piece of apple from my compost bin.
I would sometimes see the OG squirrel hanging around in the vicinity of the composting bins during the day. And one time I noticed Squirrel drinking from the water pooling on the tarps on top of the bins. Years later, I would try composting cotton from an old futon in those composting bins. But I ended up having to pull it all out after I noticed cotton balls moved from the composting bins into the glass jar of sunflower seeds situated on the opposite corner of the house. This is the part of the story about the glass jar full of sunflower seeds. When we first moved into our nest and noticed that squirrels were around, Tyler put out a glass jar and filled it with sunflower seeds. Sometimes he would put out peanuts too. The squirrels would have to awkwardly crawl up the board to get to the jar, and I felt sorry for them, so Tyler attached a tree limb to the front and later attached a second tree limb on the back as an escape route when we noticed squirrels fighting over the seeds. You see, we didn't know at the time that a red squirrel controls a domain acres in size and does not like other squirrels intruding into its realm. You can hear them chattering to let other creatures know to stay away. When the OG squirrel was really mad, we noticed that the chattering would turn into a very undignified squeaking. Other squirrels, when they're really mad, will stomp their feet, but I never saw the OG squirrel do this. It was just chattering, followed by out-of-control squeaking. Unknowingly, we had put the OG squirrel in a situation that required guarding the jar over time from squirrels and other intruders. Marauding squirrels were a problem, but also the stellar jays would hop into the jar and take seeds. When a bird was in the jar, the OG squirrel would sometimes be brave enough to run up and yank the bird by the tail, then in a flash turn around and run away. The birds would become flustered, too big to turn around in the jar, but not knowing how to back out. To remedy this problem, Tyler added 2 horizontal wooden slats on either side of the entrance, hoping to block the jays from getting in. Meanwhile, Squirrel decided to solve the intruder problem by filling the jar full of moss in order to hide the seeds. Because we still didn't understand the situation, we panicked, thinking that Squirrel was turning the jar into a house. But Squirrel was just trying to police the area, sometimes inside the jar, and other times standing guard outside and nodding off. We found that the 2 horizontal wooden slats at the entrance did not keep the jays out, so Tyler added 2 vertical slats. Now only the little birds could get in, but they weren't much of a problem because many of the little birds are migratory and don't come around very often. However, another intruder presented itself. One night, Tyler noticed movement in the seed jar and got a photo of a large squirrel with bulging eyes. After some research, we identified it as a flying squirrel, and we named it Bulgy Eyes. We joked that I was very much like Bulgy Eyes, staying awake, lurking around late at night, the weird gothic flying squirrel. The OG squirrel could guard the area through the day, but could not be around at night to deal with its creepy cousin. Eventually, we realized that it was better to put only a few seeds in the jar at lunch every day. That solved much of the marauding creature problems, and Squirrel no longer had to stuff the jar full of moss. There were enough seeds that OG Squirrel would eat all of them, or sometimes stash them in a nearby patch of moss, either on nearby tree branches or down below on the forest floor. The OG Squirrel tolerated us, couldn't really stand to look at us, most often facing away while eating seeds, sometimes turning around to give us the side eye. We decided that Squirrel must be disgusted to look at us. Slow, slimy, furless creatures, like how we might view a slug slugging its way slimily and slowly down the road. The OG squirrel would eat seeds, then afterwards zip down the tree branch to the porch corner, take a quick bath, then survey the surrounding domain, contemplating this or that, stretching out if it was sunny, but more often covering up with a tail blankie when it was cold. It seemed like the OG squirrel was only perched there for a few minutes, but Tyler pointed out that it probably felt like hours to a squirrel that always did everything at top speed. One spring day, the sun was out, and the OG squirrel and I were both jonesing for some vitamin D. Squirrel stretched out on a block of foam beside the house, and I sat on the porch, both of us soaking in the rays. Squirrel would sleep for a while, then get up and curse, and then move into a new, more comfortable position. Sometimes Squirrel would sleep in a sunny spot in the branches of a tree. It was around this time that we noticed mushrooms perched oddly on tree branches in the nearby woods in the fall. After some research, we learned that red squirrels will move mushrooms onto tree branches to dry for eating later. We would always see Squirrel cutting pine cones from tree branches to later be stashed for storage during the winter in a place called a midden. I also saw Squirrel eating greenery off blueberry bushes in the spring. Squirrel was out and about all year long, spring, summer, fall, and winter, showing up to fetch seeds almost every day of the year. One summer, we noticed 3 baby squirrels frolicking in the trees. We had been calling the OG squirrel he, but it turned out to be a she. We called these baby squirrels the 3 amigos, and we would see them taking the same route in the tree branches that Mom always traveled. Going down the highway is how we described it. It was funny to see how cautious the baby squirrels were at first moving in the trees before they became confident and quick. The only time that the OG squirrel would share the seed jar was with the baby squirrels. The baby squirrels did not understand windows. They were always inspecting things.
Oh, what's he doing? What are you doing? Oh my gosh. Little buddy, what are you doing down there? You must be one of the little ones. You're not too bright. Oh my God.
Next year, there were 2 baby squirrels that we called the dynamic duo, and they didn't understand windows either.
The 2 new squirrels, and I think Mom is trying to chase them off of the nut patch here. There's some fighting going on.
Then one day, the OG squirrel was gone. Day after day, the forest was quiet, and it became apparent that she would never return. On my birthday, Mom sent me 3 cards. She said that she hoped that they wouldn't make me too sad. One card was of a bird. There had been an old robin that followed me around in the garden. One morning I'd found it drowned in a bucket that I left out to collect rainwater. The other card was of a squirrel. The last card said, "Live long and prosper." For birthdays, Mom would often find more than one card and would end up sending 2 or 3 cards in the mail. Receiving these cards each year was one of my favorite things.
Live long and prosper.
At some point, maybe it was months later, a little squirrel moved in. We would see it coming down the highway and guess that it was one of the OG's squirrel's progeny, maybe one of the dynamic duo. Tyler thought its left ear looked odd and started calling this squirrel Little Ear. At first I ignored it because my heart was still with the OG squirrel, and I was not interested in getting to know a different squirrel. But this little squirrel had mannerisms that made it endearing. It wasn't terribly afraid of us and didn't seem disgusted with us. Instead, it would come out of the jar and stare at us while eating a seed, go back into the jar to get another seed, and then come out again to nibble and stare at us. Now, this habit might have begun when Little Ear first established this domain as his own, and there was another squirrel that regularly came out to steal seeds. Little Ear probably needed to be outside the jar to keep his eye out for this marauding squirrel. In order to distinguish the 2 squirrels, we called this other squirrel Big Ear, a dominant squirrel that I always imagined was an older squirrel, perhaps one of the 3 amigos. Big Ear would get into the jar to eat the seeds, and if Little Ear got up the courage to run and take a swipe at him, then Big Ear would get annoyed and come out and chase Little Ear away. Tyler felt sorry for Little Ear, chattering away in anger in a nearby branch, sometimes stomping his little feet, while Big Ear gobbled all of the seeds. So Tyler would give Little Ear a few seeds in a separate location. When Big Ear was done eating in the jar, he would always make death-defying jumps into the nearby trees. Little Ear always traveled in the other direction, moving on the branches along the highway like the OG squirrel. Regardless of how Little Ear's habit of eating came about, he often exits the jar to eat seeds and stare at us while we eat our lunch and stare back at him. I haven't seen Big Ear in a while. Maybe Little Ear finally chased him off. Little Ear has learned that Tyler is the one who brings the seeds. At lunchtime, Tyler comes rolling up the road in his big white shell before getting out. If Tyler takes too long to exit the shell and put seeds into the jar, Little Ear will trot to the porch entrance and wait impatiently while standing on his hind legs with squirrel paws tucked against his white belly. If Tyler is moving on the porch towards the jar too slowly, Little Ear will hop alongside, sometimes standing around the jar, making it difficult to dump out the shuck seeds and put in a clump of new seeds. A few days ago, Little Ear snagged a seed right from Tyler's hand. Anyway, that is the story of the OG squirrel, and now Little Ear. I wanted Mom to see this video about the OG squirrel, but I didn't finish it in time. It doesn't really matter because she probably saw or heard most of these stories over the years. She gave me 2 cards for my birthday in August, a few weeks before she died this Labor Day. One card has fortune cookies, and the other one has a sun. I'll be getting the sun tattooed on my arm, so that the little bright shining light that she was in this world will always be with me.